All right, A3 homework. So discrete, continuous, and discontinuous graphs. All right, let's look at number one. I see one complete graph here. So this is definitely continuous. The domain, right? If I go most left to most right, the arrows imply infinity. So this is negative infinity to infinity as far as interval notation is concerned, right? Negative infinity to infinity. X, and for inequality, X is any real number. And you could say the real number line here as well, any real number here. So either one of these will be correct, in my opinion. All right, for the range, we're looking at what's the smallest that y can be. And that's going to be the same in every problem, right? The smallest y can be, and then the most that y can be. The greatest, the largest. So the smallest that y can be is 0, bracket. And then the largest is positive infinity. Okay, for the inequality, it's always the variable. So y, because it's the range that we're talking about, and we're comparing it to 0. So if the interval is greater than 0, right? All the numbers that are greater than 0, including 0. So y is going to be greater than or equal to 0. Okay, number 2. Here we have what we refer to as a step function. So it's multiple little lines. So there's a bunch of breaks. So this is definitely discontinuous. Discontinuous. So for the domain, remember domain is always the x values. And we say what is the most left that x could be. Or that x is, rather. So here we have x is equal to 0. So bracket 0. Now, as we move to the right, right here, even though there's a closed circle and an open circle, the closed circle takes priority, right? So technically it's still together, right? Like it's still continuous, right? Because it's x is equal to 0, 0.5, 0.9, and then 1. 1.1, 1.8, 1.9, and then 2. So just because it's broken, it appears broken. But in terms of x, if you were to smash them together, right, like push them together, they would make one continuous line, kind of like Legos or something. So the most right that this would be is 5 with an open circle. So from 0 to 5, right? Any value from 0 to 5 will be in this graph as far as x is concerned, right? All these are still there. As an inequality, right, from 0 to 5, so 0 to 5, we know x is in the middle. We want less than or equal, and then less than, because we're including 0, but we're not including 5. All right, erase that. So in terms of range, right, we're saying what values of y are being used. Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Only 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And it's in set notation. So curly bracket, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, step function. That's a fun one. All right, number 3. We have a little piece of a line. It's still one piece. So this is continuous, right? Because it's one whole piece. Even though it's cut off, it's one continuous piece. All right, the interval, we say most left. So the most left is -1. Zoom in a little bit. -1. Most right, +1. So the smallest x could be is -1 with an open circle. And the largest x could be is +1. And we include it because it's a closed circle. All right. On the interval, -1 to 1, we want to write this as an inequality. So -1 to 1, x is in the middle. So we don't include -1, and we include +1. So whenever you have an interval with two numbers like this, -1, 1, to write the inequality, you just put x in between them, or y if we're talking about the range. So speaking of range, we're looking at from left to right, or not left to right, from bottom to top, right? Range is bottom to top, bottom first, and then the top. So the smallest that y could be is -1. Parentheses, right, because open circle. The largest that y could be is 5. Bracket. Close circle. Again, we have an interval -1 to 5, and we want to write this as an inequality. So we put y in between because it's the range. We don't include -1, but we do include 5. All right. Number 4. Looks like an arch that starts at 0, 0, goes to an arrow. So this is one continuous piece, right? It's just one piece. It's not multiple pieces, and it's not dots. It's not dotted. Okay, domain, we're talking about the x's. So the most left that x could be, that is 0. Bracket, because a closed circle. The most right that x could be has an arrow, so infinity, parentheses. Now here we have 0 to infinity, right? Including 0 and everything above it. So when you have just one number and infinity, you compare the number to the variable. So x first and then 0. And we're saying that x has to be greater than or equal to 0, right? Because it's all the numbers that are bigger than 0. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way to infinity. So everything bigger. All right. Range, same idea, except we're looking at the y values. And we start at the bottom. So the smallest y that is used is 0 with the bracket. The largest y that is used goes to an arrow. So this is positive infinity. So 0 to infinity looks just like the domain, right? So we're going to use y instead of x. So y is greater than or equal to 0. Okay. I have to watch those a couple times just to run it back so you can convince yourself of what I'm saying. Okay, number 5. So here we have a parabola. It's one continuous graph, right? right? There's no breaks, so it's continuous. From left to right, because we're talking about the domain, the x's. So from left to right, the most left and most right, it goes from arrow to arrow. So we're saying interval notation. This is going to be negative infinity to infinity. Or you might say, right, you don't need to keep putting this both answers every time. It's either or, right? It's really up to you. Okay. Range, the y values. So we look at always starting at the bottom. What's the smallest y value that is used? Is 0. Bracket. And the greatest y value, the largest rather, it's going to be positive infinity. So 0 to infinity. All right, number 6. Okay, this one looks fun. It's one graph for sure, right? There's no breaks, even though there's a turn that's like there's no gaps. Right? This is one continuous graph. The domain, the x's, and this is going to get real repetitive, right? I'm saying the same thing every problem because it's literally the same thing every time, right? The most left, so -5, bracket. Most right, +5, parentheses, because it's an open circle. The range, which is the y values. So here we have the most bottom possible y value is -1 with the bracket. All right, so this one is shaped funny. And then you might feel a little weird, like around this middle part here. But we don't care about that part. All we care about are the ends, right? What's the least it could be, what's the most it could be. And as long as there's no breaks in the middle, we're good. So the greatest y value that is used is +5 with the parentheses. So -1 to 5. Include -1. Do not include 5. Right? Even if there's like crazy stuff that's happening in the middle. We don't care about that. All right, number 7. I see 2 pieces, right? Here's one graph and then a completely different graph. So this is definitely discontinuous, right? Definitely discontinuous because there's this obvious gap right here, a piece that's missing in the middle. So the domain in interval notation, again, always start at the left. Always start at the left, from left to right. The most left is -7 with the closed circle. So bracket. The next most right of this piece is going to be -1 with a parentheses. All right. We have a second piece, so we have to union these intervals together. So the most left of the right graph is +1 with the bracket. And the most right is 7, parentheses. Okay, for the range, we're talking y values. So domain was x, range is y. All right, so always start at the bottom. What is the most least y value used? And it is -4, bracket. Slide up slightly, we have -2. Now, even though there's a closed circle and an open circle on the same line, the closed circle gets priority. So this is going to be -2 bracket. If it was two open circles, that's a different story. Then it would be parentheses. But when it's mixed like this, a closed circle and an open circle, the closed circle trumps the open circle. All right, we're going to union this together with another piece. The other piece, the most bottom y value, right, the least y value, is 1. Again, bracket, because the closed circle takes priority. The most greatest y value used in this one is 3, +3, with a bracket. Okay. All right, here we have, it looks like a V. It's just one, right? It's one piece. It goes down and then it turns and goes up. Like there's no gaps in the middle. It's all one continuous piece. Continuous. In interval notation, the domain, talking about the x's, the most left, 2, bracket, most right, 6, parentheses. All right, for the range, we're talking y values. So for the y values, we're looking at the most bottom that y could be. And we see that's 1, bracket, and then the greatest y value that is used. This looks like 4 or 5. Comma 5. Again, closed circle, open circle. Closed circle gets priority. So bracket. All right. Moving right along. Okay. Here's a fun one also. So this one's real busy. It has a lot of things happening. So here we have, I see 2 graphs. So here's one. And there are arrows here. And then here's a second. So there's 2 graphs, branches as we refer to them. There's 2. So this is discontinuous, right? There's one graph and then there's a completely separate graph that is that is not connected. Not connected. All right. The interval for this, so just note that these dashed lines are like boundaries. They have a name. We'll get to them in a later section, but it's called the asymptotes, right? But I wouldn't get too caught up on that part. Just know that they're boundaries, that the red graphs can never ever cross. So the domain, which is the x values, we go to the start always on the left. What's the most left? Well, there's an arrow. That arrow implies that it goes towards infinity, negative infinity. And then as you start to work your way right, you hit another arrow right here. That's right up against that boundary. So it's up to 0. But again, that red line graph never crosses the asymptote, right? It doesn't cross that boundary. So we don't include 0. This is everything from negative infinity up to, but not including 0. And then we have a second piece that we union, and it picks right up, right where this one left off at 0, right? Again, not including 0 because both of these graphs never touch 0. And it goes towards infinity. All right, the range for this, it's identical to the domain. Right here, it's identical. And it's for the exact same reasons, right? Because of the symmetry of this thing. So the most bottom, the most least, is going to be the little arrow that's on that right-hand side. So it's going to be negative infinity with the parentheses. And then as you work your way up, right, as you work your way up, you get closer to this boundary that is 0. But it'll never cross, right? The red graph will never cross 0. So 0. We have 2 pieces, so we have to union them together. And it'll pick right up where that one left off, right? It'll be at 0, not including 0, and infinity with parentheses. So the domain and range here are exactly identical, right? X and Y could be any number as long as it's not 0, because that's where the asymptote is. The boundary. Okay. 10, halfway through. All right, I'm looking at the graph. I see just one line. Looks kind of like a little S turned on its side. So it's continuous. There's no breaks. The domain, the x's, most left to most right. -4, +4. On the left, we have open circle, so parentheses. And on the right, closed circle, bracket. For the range, again, this is most bottom to most top. All right, what's the smallest y could be? -2, bracket. And the largest y value used is +2, so bracket. All right, that's halfway. Moving right along. Number 11. Here's another fun one. So this is very similar to the last one we had that looked like this. So we have the left branch. There's arrows. So I see there's 2 branches, and they come together, but they never ever touch. They'll get infinitely close, but they'll never touch. So this is discontinuous because there's 2 pieces. There's one on the left, the red one, and then one on the right, which I haven't drawn yet. So if we look at the left side, because we're going to talk about the domain first, you look at the left side, the most left is this arrow right here. And then as you slide this arrow to the right, you get right up on this boundary, like this asymptote right here, that it'll never cross. So it'll keep getting closer and closer and closer and closer, but it'll never touch. So it's essentially 0, but we just don't include 0. So that'll be 0. Not 0. It'll be -infinity up to 0 with parentheses, right? Because it'll never be 0. There's 2 pieces, so we're going to union them together. So now, when we start on the other branch, on the right-hand side, we're right up on 0, right? Because that graph is extending all the way up. So we're starting at 0, but we're not including 0, right? It's right next to it. And then it goes towards positive infinity. So what I'm saying is it picks up where the last one left off, 0, and goes towards infinity. The range this time is not the same. So here we say, okay, the y values, what's the least y value used? Well, there's nothing down here. So the graph doesn't start down there. It starts right here at 0. But remember that red line, as it approaches the dash line, it'll never ever touch the dash line. So it's going to start at 0, but we just don't include 0. So parentheses, comma, and then it's going to go up towards infinity. All right. Number 12. Here's a tricky one. It's tricky because, one, it's one graph, right? It's one graph, but the arrow is above everything else. That's what makes this tricky, is that the arrow is up here. Because the arrow really implies that it goes on forever this way. So it gives it an illusion that it actually stops, right? That's what makes this one weird. But it is continuous, right? It's just one graph. The domain, the most left, is -1, parentheses. And then most right is the arrow, infinity. When it comes to range, we go from bottom to the top. So again, this is why this is tricky, right? The most smallest y value used would be -infinity. Right? If you didn't draw this out, you would think that right here at -2, this would be it, but that's not true. You have to extend that line out. And so the greatest y value used is +5. -infinity up to +5 with the bracket. All right. $13. Okay, here's another one that has one of these little boundaries, this asymptote. All right, so the graph approaches this asymptote and it gets, again, infinitely close, but it'll never ever land. And then it goes off to the side, right, towards -infinity. And it's just one piece. So again, this is continuous. The domain, the x value, is going from left to right. So arrow to arrow. Even though there is no arrow, there is. They just didn't put it. This goes on forever towards -infinity. So -infinity. Actually, we're going to say from arrow to arrow, we'll do all row numbers. From left to right. All row numbers from left to right. The domain. So for the range, which is bottom to top, the y values. So the most bottom, there's an asymptote right here. This is the least amount of value for y, is 0. It's where it starts. It's 0. And it's a parentheses because it'll never be 0, but it'll get infinitely close to 0. And then the greatest this could be is +infinity, right? We can take it up to the arrow, and that's the greatest y value, right? Infinity. Okay, little arc, looks like something being thrown. So here we have one continuous graph, right? It's one graph. The domain, talking about the x values. The most left and most right. That's what we're talking about, left to right. So the most left is 0, bracket because closed circle, and 5, parentheses, because it has an open circle. So that's the domain from left to right. The range will go from the bottom to the top. So the most smallest y value up to the largest y value, regardless of what happens in the middle. As long as there's no break, we're good. There was no break, right? It's just one continuous graph. So this is going from 0 to 6. Bracket, bracket. Bracket, bracket. Okay. And another one. So this one, number 15, Again, it's one graph, right? There's only one piece. There's no gaps. Continuous. Domain, the x values. So most left to most right. We're going from arrow to arrow, from left to right, arrow to arrow. Negative infinity to infinity. And sure, of course, you could have put the bold R if you wanted, right? It really doesn't matter. All right, for the range, we're going from the most bottom to the largest. Again, regardless of what happens in the middle, because it's continuous. So all I care about are the ends. And this goes from arrow to arrow. So negative infinity to infinity. Or all real numbers. Both of these are sufficient. All right, 16. Let's go. Here we have, looks like two pieces, but it's not. It's one piece because there is no gap, right? They are connected. They're linked together. So this is one piece, one continuous piece. The x values go from most left to most right, right? Like you start to get quicker at this, right? Most left to most right. This is negative 2, parentheses, 6, bracket. Right, that's most left to most right, and everything in between. For the range, we're using the most bottom, what's being used, to the most top. So the smallest y value that is used is negative 4 with a parentheses because it's an open circle. The largest y value used is 6. Again, open circle. So parentheses. All right, last page, and we're cooking. So we only got 4 left. All right, here we go. This one looks fun. So looking at it, obviously I'm seeing two different pieces. I'm seeing a left one and a right one. There's this huge gap where they're disconnected. So discontinuous, right? Because it's exactly two pieces. Okay. The domain, we're talking about the x values. Nothing changes regardless of how it looks, right? It's always the most left to the most right. So the most left arrow, that implies negative infinity. The most right of this piece, negative 2, closed circle. So bracket. We're going to union this with the other piece. So the most left of the other piece, positive 2, in parentheses. All the way up to arrow. So that implies positive infinity. So negative infinity to negative 2. And then positive union, positive 2 to infinity. All right, the range, the exact same idea, except the y values. So we're going to start at the bottom. So the most bottom, oh, it's an arrow. So negative infinity with a parentheses. Okay, so this is where this is going to get kind of weird. So check this out. So as you move up, what is the greatest y value that this left function has? So it's going to be 0, right? Because it's right there on the line on the x-axis. However, so right here, this is the most greatest y value on the left. However, it just so happens that it's also the smallest y value for the right-hand side. So technically, they're kind of connected together. It's like two closed circles on the same line, which is okay. It's still being used, right? 0 is being used. So we could just keep it going. Keep it going all the way up to positive infinity, right? Like it pushes through. So I'll put this back down here so you can see it. So all we're asking is what y values are actually being used. Not how many times they're being used, but which ones are being used. And so this is to infinity. Negative infinity to infinity. All right. 18. Here we have, again, two pieces. Little half moon shape, and then this little one shooting up. So we have two pieces. This is discontinuous, right? There's an obvious gap right here. Got to be able to see it. The interval for this, for the domain, the x's, the most left and most right of each one. So the most left is going to be -5, right? So -5 bracket up to -2 bracket. And this is union with the other piece, right? So the most left of the other piece, x equals 0 with the bracket. And most right, we have an arrow, right? It's an arrow, not a dot. So it's not 5, it's infinity, positive. So we have two pieces. Two pieces. Okay, for the range, we have the most, always start at the bottom. What's the smallest y that is used? So the graph doesn't even exist down here, but I did that for effect so I can slide it up. So the smallest, least y value that is used is 0. Bracket. And then as you move up, the next largest y value is going to be 2. Again, bracket. It's two pieces, so we're going to have to union this to the other piece. As you move up, you see the next smallest y value is 4 with a bracket. And then lastly, the greatest y value goes up to the arrow, which implies, that's right, infinity with the parentheses. That one was a fun one. That one was cool. All right, 18. And we had the y values, right? We're almost there. 19. Okay, this one's I feel like this one was like, do we have one like this yet? No, we haven't. Okay. All right, number 19. So I have one piece. We have one whole piece. So this is continuous. The domain, which refers to the x's, we take the most left up to the most right. So -1, bracket, infinity is the arrow. Range is y. So the smallest y value used up to the greatest y value used. So this is going to go from 0, bracket, up to infinity. So domain, left to right, range, bottom to top, 0 to infinity. All right, we made it, ladies and gentlemen. The last problem, number 20. Here we go. This one's easy. It's just one piece, right? It's one piece. Even though it has this turn in it, that's okay. It's still connected, right? That's what we're looking for. Is it connected? That's what it's asking. So yes, this is continuous. Continuous function. The domain, we look at the most left and most right. So -1 to 6. We don't care about the middle because there was no break. So -1 up to 6. bracket, right? Because they're both closed circles. They're both closed circles. And then the range, again, the most bottom, what's the smallest, and then the most top. So there is this one that's in the middle, but we don't care about in the middle. We care about the extremes, right? Like the ends, the most bottom and the most top, regardless of what happens in the middle, right? Regardless. So this is going to be -5 bracket up to +1 with the bracket, I believe. Let's see. I have too much written over it. Yeah, it's a bracket. Closed circle. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully this helps out. Catch you guys in the next video. Peace.